So today is all about covering negotiations. So we've got some exercises we're going to go through. I also want you guys, this is a class to ask questions because negotiations are one of the things that really can make or break you as an agent. The better you get at this piece of your business, the more you'll close. So I really, it's one that if you've had things come up and you've got questions about it or scenarios that you've heard of, it's one to really dig into. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jen Seidelman. I'm the productivity coach in the KWSC office. I've been in the industry now for 22 years. I'm licensed in California and Oregon, soon to be Washington. And I've been a team leader in 2 Keller Williams offices. I've been a productivity coach in 3 offices. I've been coaching agents now for 18 years. So I've got a lot of background in this. Use me as a resource. That's what I'm here for. So let's start out. I did some coverage, but Abby and Cleo, you just jumped in. How are things going? Just want to kind of do a quick check-in before we jump into the class. Anything you need support around? How's business going? Anything? Hi, Cleo. Oh, you're muted.
I really don't have anything to report. I have like 0 business as of yet, so I'm still in the sponge phase.
All right. I like it when you're like, all right, I'll be honest. Here's where I'm at. Okay, so we'll let you be a sponge today. And Abby, how about you? Are you good? Need any support around anything? Oh, looks like you said something in the chat. Very good. Okay. All right, then let's talk about negotiation. All right, so we start out with negotiating is not something to be avoided or feared. It's an everyday part of life. My question to you guys is when I say that, or when I say negotiations, what comes up for you? Oops, any limiting beliefs around negotiations? Sorry, I just hit the wrong button.
Making offers and countering.
Okay. Does negotiating scare anybody? No? So one thing I'll tell you is, because it says negotiating is not something to be avoided or feared. First of all, any of you have kids, I guarantee you negotiate on a daily basis. And if you've got more than one kid, they probably gang up on you and they out negotiate you. So we truly do negotiate in every day. The example they give here is about purchasing a car. And again, that's something that we do tend to negotiate because they're a higher dollar item, but we negotiate every day in all of our relationships. So the more we're able to think of it that way, the more we start to see that, hey, I can be practicing these skills all the time. So, is it scary? Yes, when you think of it as it's this big, sorry, I don't know why the slides are moving themselves. There we go. Is it scary? Sometimes, yes. If you can remember that what it really is, though, is something that you're doing all the time, I think that makes it a little bit easier because we're not as concerned about it then. So try and think of it that way if you can. And what we're going to go through today is we're going to walk through really what negotiation is. And it's a huge part of your business. It is one of the things that NAR, in both the buyers and the sellers, that they've said it's one of the top things that an agent looks for in terms of help with their sale. So the person who can out negotiate tends to win the game, both with finding the clients and then ultimately getting to the closing table. So what is it? And then how does it play into our Y4C2Ts? So it's a bargaining process and it's a give and take. So sometimes we think of negotiation as like a zero-sum game. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And when we look at our Y4C2Ts, which of the Y4C2Ts do you see showing up when we're talking about negotiation? This is where you guys get to participate. You got them up in front of you. Which of those apply to negotiation?
Well, all of them on some level.
I would agree with that. I would say the big ones, because they all do. And that's why actually I love the Y4C2Ts, because they do all apply. They apply in everything we do on a daily basis. The win-win or no deal, big one in negotiation. Integrity, communication, and trust, I would say, are some of the ones that really show up. But then, like when we go through, customers always come first. That means yours and the other person's. Commitment to getting through it and making it happen and working through issues. Communication, again, we have a tendency to think we know. So rather than assuming, remembering that going out and actually getting clarity and understanding really helps with negotiation. Creativity. The more you understand negotiation, and you'll hear me say this several times today, the more you understand your forms, our contracts, the more you're able to get creative with how you negotiate. I always say the person who understands the contract best wins the game. And we'll talk about that some today, but that's why you'll hear, don't take your contracts classes once, keep going back, keep going back, keep going back. You'll learn something new each time. And if you master that contract, then you know how to manipulate the contract when you're negotiating. If you don't understand your contract, then you're not able to do that. So just that to me is kind of where some of the creativity from the Y4C2Ts come in, is the more you understand, the more you're able to actually negotiate and get the results you're looking for. But the big one on here is we are always looking for a win-win. That's who we are. That's how we show up. It's not a I win and you lose. One of the things remembering is that these are people that you are building relationships with, and you will likely be, your clients, hopefully you'll have, in your life until you retire from the business. Other agents, though, they make a big difference in getting transactions closed, getting your offers accepted, all of that. So the more you make it a win-win when you're negotiating rather than a zero-sum game, the better you'll be for the long run in terms of your reputation. A couple other things that sort of tie into the Y4C2Ts is remembering, the seek first to understand, and that also ties into keep your emotions under control. One of the things that comes up a lot in negotiations is people get a little hot-headed. The clients can, the agents can, and just remembering that you are always the voice of reason. So your emotions, as much as you can, you check them out the door. And again, we'll talk more about that today, but just kind of have that in the back of your head, that this is not your transaction. You are doing this on behalf of your client. And the best thing you can do for negotiations is keep cool, calm, and collected, especially when talking with your client. If you start, I always kind of say, if you're frustrated with the other side and you start sharing that with your client, now instead of being able to pull the energy up and create positivity, now you're both kind of in that negative space, which is never a good place for actually negotiating and getting to an end result that gets everyone where they want to be. And then remembering to always give people grace, remembering that whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, both sides have needs that they are trying to get met. And so they are not necessarily negotiating against you. They're negotiating for themselves. And remembering that makes a huge difference in terms of how you kind of go about things. So I always say, go in with grace for other people, and also assuming good intent. Until somebody has shown you that their intent is not good, you want to assume, hey, they are coming at this from a positive place, and I'm going to assume that until they prove otherwise. Any questions on kind of the Y4C2Ts and how they tie in with negotiation? Okay. All righty, so here is the path of negotiation. And I know if you were in the last Ignite class, you were going over offers. And in a perfect world, option number one here would always be what happened. We'd make an offer, it would get accepted, and it would close. I've been party to thousands of transactions in my life at this point, and I've never seen it be that simple. So negotiation shows up in every transaction we do. And so when we're looking at that, we want to remember we're going to be going through that option number two more often than option number one, and one of the things you'll see here is, yes, we've got the initial offer and that's rejected or countered. Then we go into negotiation around that. We also then throughout the transaction are negotiating. We negotiate on repairs, which oftentimes the repairs negotiation is the biggest negotiation in the entire transaction. So just realizing that each step of the way you're negotiating. You're also negotiating with your clients even before you get into contract. And we'll talk some about that today. Again, if you have questions throughout this, I'm very much somebody who likes people to jump in and ask. So don't feel like I have to ask you, just holler, or I've got the chat open. So if you can't talk, throw your questions into the chat. I may not catch them right away, but I want to make sure anything you have that I answer it. All right. So like I said, who are we negotiating in a transaction? Well, if you are on the buyer side, you're negotiating with the buyer, the seller's agent, and the seller. If you're on the opposite side as the seller, you're negotiating with your client, the buyer, and the buyer's agent. You're negotiating with everything. So in every one, there's at least 4 parties. And let's be honest, typically you're negotiating with somebody. Oftentimes there's 2 people that are the buyers and 2 people that are the sellers. So now we've put 6 people into a negotiation. That's 6 personalities. That's 6 people that have their own end result that they would like. So remembering that, coming in, it's not a one size fits all. So that's part of negotiation. And then again, this comes up with each one of these parties to this transaction is forming an opinion about you in terms of long term. So looking at that and thinking about, how am I showing up for my client? How am I showing up and being perceived by the agent on the other side and the clients on the other side? That gives you the way you show up in your negotiations not only impacts that transaction, it impacts future transactions with that agent. So remembering that from the second you have first communication with an agent, negotiating started. So what do I mean by that? Following showing instructions in the MLS. You've already started negotiations because they're already forming an opinion about who you are as an agent. So remembering that, when we have agents that just randomly show up and don't follow the instructions, and then they write an offer, well, there's already that feeling of, well, this person already has kind of stepped out of line and not done the right thing. How is it going to be with them throughout the transaction? So remembering that you have an impact on your client. And that could be a positive or a negative in terms of whether or not they get their offer accepted. Any questions on kind of how this plays with the negotiations? Because this goes, all directions here. And sometimes it's like, well, wait a minute, how as the seller am I negotiating with the buyer's agent and vice versa? Okay. So what do you think we negotiate in a transaction? What are some of the things that get negotiated?
Price.
Mm-hmm. Definitely one of the main ones. What else? Yep. Conditions of the property, repairs. And we'll talk some about that today, because that is oftentimes where things kind of go sideways. So I'll give you a hint. Here's your next slide. So we are negotiating on price. Typically, that is usually the primary thing we negotiate on. However, a key point is also terms. And so what are some of the terms we negotiate on? We negotiate on timeframes. So those are your contingency timeframes, your closing timeframes. We negotiate on rent backs. Again, that's kind of a time frame, but on rent back, and whether or not that's a paid rent back, a free rent back. We negotiate on closing dates. We negotiate on repairs. We negotiate sometimes on appraisal. We negotiate on earnest money, personal property. We negotiate on home warranties. So as you see, there's a lot of different pieces we negotiate, and these come up in every transaction. So once again, the more we get comfortable with, okay, now we're going to negotiate on this, the more it just becomes easier to move through a transaction. So what other things, if any, or what challenges have you guys had with negotiating on any of these items in the past? Anything? Okay. So one of the things when you're looking at this, when you know that there's this many different things that we negotiate on, one of the critical things to do before, I'm kind of looking at right now from the standpoint of a buyer, because most of you, that's probably where your first negotiations will really occur, is with the buyer side. And so one of the things to do is ask, what is important to the seller besides price? I will also tell you, as a listing agent, if I get an offer and that other agent hasn't checked in with me to ask on that, I'm already kind of going, are they really doing the best job of negotiation on behalf of their client? Because they're just randomly submitting an offer. So checking in beforehand, whether that's an email, a text, a phone call, but just saying, hey, obviously price is one of the key things, but what else is important? That allows you then to start addressing some of the other things that would be coming up. Do they need a rent back? Do they need a quick close, or do they need a longer close? Those kinds of things. If you find that out up front, then you write a cleaner offer. Questions on some of the items that we negotiate, or any of these aspects? You are quiet, guys. All right. So that kind of wraps up the first section. So tell me, what, if anything, is a takeaway from just that first section there? So anything that came up that you hadn't thought about as being a negotiation item?
My take back is what you just mentioned about asking the sellers what's important to them besides price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really big one, because we assume price is everything. Yes, exactly. Impressions stick with all parties of a transaction. Yeah, not just the ones you represent. In fact, sometimes even they stick more with the people you aren't representing. So remembering that is really important. So that's a good one. Yeah. So, and just remembering that if you need to, and then you've got your notes here, you know, you can make yourself almost a checklist of, have I really looked at each one of these to see if we're negotiating as strongly in each category as we can? Because sometimes those little tweaks make all the difference in the world. And we kind of think, oh, it's not a big deal. We don't know what the big deal is to the other party. So asking, and then looking at each angle, because sometimes the other side won't even think about whether or not that's important, or there'll be something unique to a transaction that's important. You know, I've had transactions where the one of the big things was they didn't want to take all their belongings. You know, that'll happen oftentimes, you know, if there's been a death or something. So if my client as the buyer is willing to take that on, that's a huge win for the seller. But if I don't ask that question up front, then I would never know to negotiate that. Sometimes something like that, they will take an offer that's a lower price because it's less, whoops, as I throw my pen, because it's less hassle for them. So remembering that, and really, again, coming from curiosity and asking questions. All right, so we're going to move to the 3 Ps. Anyone have any idea of what the 3 Ps might be? I would be impressed if you did. Patience. I like that. That actually should be on there. That's the 4th P. That's actually a good one. That should be in there. All right. Well, I won't keep you in suspense. So the 3 Ps are prepare, present, and position. So this should be, you should have this in your guide if you've got your guide in front of you. So if you think about it this way, it helps you go, where am I in the negotiation process? So, you know, preparing, we're getting ready to go into the process and making sure it's a smooth process. The more you prepare, the more you're going to be feeling comfortable and confident. It's one of the reasons why, you know, when we talk about like doing role plays and scripts and practicing your buyer consultation, your listing presentation, all of those are so that you feel more confident going in. Negotiation is the same thing. Presenting, so that's moving, you know, into the process and presenting the offer. Interestingly enough, we used to present offers in person. Like you would meet with the seller and the agent and you would review the offers. As you know, these days, we don't tend to do that. Sometimes that still is an opportunity. Usually now the presentation is literally what we send to the agent. And so we'll go through some of that today. And then position. Position is how do we kind of move people and navigate to get them to that point of, okay, we've got an agreement and we can move forward from there. So we're going to go into depth in each one of those. And then again, these are things to start practicing. I will always say it. If you're not practicing on each other or with other agents, you are practicing with quote unquote real people. And the last thing we want is for you to be out practicing on somebody that could be a client. We want you practicing with people that you can learn from and grow, you know, and grow from working with them on. Okay, so prepare. We start out with, you've got to know your goal. And yes, that is your goal. So what is your goal personally? And usually that's directly tied to your client. I hope it's directly tied to your client. So if your goal is, I want a win-win agreement where both the buyer and the seller are happy. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody gets everything they want. Sometimes that happens. Usually it means there's some give and take, but everybody walks away from the table feeling good. You know, that's a good negotiation. The other piece with that is reminding your clients of that. So number 2 is knowing your client, and you've got to know what your client's goals are. Now, hopefully you're going to know that going in because you've done a really strong buyer consultation and you know your client, or on the listing side, you know why your client, you know what's important to your seller, timeframes, why they're moving, what's important in that offer to them. It's important to understand on both sides also what is a hard, like this is non-negotiable, and where are they flexible? Knowing that will help you just right out the gate. So being frank with them. And a lot of times, especially on the buyer side, they'll say, well, I want this, this, and this. Okay, well, what is most important about that? Price oftentimes is one of the numbers, especially if they're kind of towards the top of their price range. Well, then, they need to be able to, that is not negotiable. They can only go so high. But then what are the other things? And do they have flexibility on that? Oftentimes it'll be, with them in terms of them, moving in. Then think ahead. What do you think the other side is going to want out of the negotiation? Now, some of that is also checking in and finding out. But if you have an idea, if you've submitted an offer, oftentimes where your offer is maybe not as strong as it could be, or maybe isn't necessarily what they're going to want. And so you're able to kind of plan ahead and think about, how am I going to negotiate through this? Oops, sorry. Oh, there we go. Then we've got set clear expectations. So we're going to talk about what's realistic with your client. So for instance, if you're representing a buyer and they're coming in and they're like, well, yeah, I want to come in $100,000 below the list price. The expectation with that client is, hey, we can submit that. And I want to make sure that you understand there's a good chance they're going to come back and counter. So the more you have set expectations and had these conversations with your clients, the more you're able to negotiate and get things moved through. And it's also having the conversation with your clients that we are looking for a win-win. Sometimes you get clients who just have to beat the other person. It doesn't matter what they actually want. It's all about, can I beat them? And we are looking for, yeah, we want to win. We want to get everything we want, but it's not about beating the other side. When you submit an offer that is just running over the top of the seller, not only are they likely to reject it, if they don't reject it, they're going to counter a lot stronger and a lot more harshly than if it was an offer that made a little bit more sense. So having that conversation with the client, and sometimes saying, put yourself in that person's shoes, whether it's you're representing the buyer making the offer or the seller responding to the offer. How would you want to be treated in that situation? What would you be looking for in an offer? And that way it helps to kind of get them out of an us and them mentality, because we're looking for more of a, how do we bring this together? Because everybody wants the same thing. The buyer and the seller want the house to sell. The listing agent and the buyer's agent want the house to sell. So everybody wants the same thing. It's just, how do we get to that? Be informed. So again, we've talked about talking to the other agent, finding out what's important to them. That goes with each side, because if you've made an offer as a buyer's agent, the listing agent, before they counter you, really should talk and say, hey, my seller's having some issues with this part of the offer you made. What's important to your client? The more you know, the more power you have. So one of the things, when you're a buyer representing the buyer and you call that listing agent and ask what's important, ask the question and then shut your mouth and just listen. You will be amazed at what some agents will tell you. So just sit back and let them talk. They will tell you things that sometimes they maybe shouldn't. They will tell you things that will help you negotiate, quite frankly, against them and against their client. Now, on the flip side, as a buyer's agent, you can do the same thing. If a listing agent's asking you a bunch of questions, make sure that whatever you're sharing is stuff that's going to help move your client forward, not possibly tip their hand, because we are still in kind of a poker game here. It's like, I know what my cards are. They've got their cards. I want to make sure that I don't do anything to show my cards that might hurt or damage my client. And so remembering that and learning as much as you can. And then obviously, well, I think it's obvious. Hopefully we all think it's obvious. Obey the laws. Don't do anything illegal. Understand the laws, which you learn. That's one of the beautiful things, being at KW, we teach you this stuff and it's ongoing. So just staying aware of that and staying on top of it as you go through your career. And then finally, and I already kind of hammered this home, but I'll hammer it again. Know your documents inside and out. The person who knows the forms the best knows how to negotiate the best utilizing those documents. There are times that I have negotiated with an agent and they have damaged their client just because they did not understand the contract. If I understand the contract and I understand what it means better than the other agent, I have the upper hand. And that is something that every single one of you can do. That is not an experience thing. That is reading the forms over and over again. It's asking questions. It is attending the contracts classes over and over again. So you really know those forms. I know it's a little dry, and it's not dry when you're making more money because you out negotiated the other agent. So, okay. What questions or ahas do you have on what it takes to prepare? Nothing? All right. So then my question is, in terms of ahas, how can you utilize what we just covered there in your business?
To me, it's setting clear expectations that it's not going to be like us against them mentality.
And I would say exactly what you're saying there. The clear expectations are on all of it. The more you have educated your clients on the process, which means you also need to understand the process, the more they understand how things are going to go, the easier negotiations will be and the easier your life will be. If you explain things and then continue to explain them and remind them and explain them, then you don't get caught off guard. When we assume or when we tell somebody something one time, remember, they're doing something that they only do a few times in their lifetime. And I know you're brand new for the most part. And so you may feel like, well, yeah, I'm only doing this once too. This is my first or second time. It will become something that you do over and over again. So remembering, just like you need to hear things more than once as you're learning the business, they need to hear things more than once as you go through the transaction. So reminding them, I know we covered this at the beginning, but now we're coming to this part of the transaction. So I'm going to walk you through it again. And you can say to them, I'm not saying this to you because I think that you wouldn't remember. You've got a lot on your plate, and I want to make sure that you know this information. So continuing to remind them and walk them through. That's kind of part of the negotiations with your own client. Okay, moving on. We're going to ask purposeful questions. So what a purposeful question does is it helps move you forward in the negotiation. So it's going to give you the points you're negotiating on. It's giving insight on where you have the leverage and where they have the leverage. It, again, sets the clear expectations. It allows you to know your clients better and their goals. And it helps, again, with what's a win-win for both sides. So questions and staying in that place of curiosity rather than assuming, rather than asking. We're going to talk about open-ended and closed-ended questions. The more you ask open-ended questions, the more that's where you start to have, like I said, where you'll have an agent tell you things that you're like, wow, I'm kind of shocked they're telling that, but you're asking the right questions. So it's kind of drawing it out of them. That's what we want to do, because that gives us more information. So we're able to negotiate better for our clients. So open versus closed questions. You've probably heard this before. Open-ended questions are ones that have, like, you can go anywhere with the response. And up here, you've got like, what additional information should I know? What is important about closing in 30 days? How do you feel about that? Notice all of those, I could go any direction with that. A close-ended question is, it's usually a very short, usually it's a yes or no. Do you have to sell your home by a specific date? That's going to probably be yes, or it'll be yes, it has to be sold by September 1st. Do you have any other offers? Yes, or it'll be, so even with that, do you have any other offers? There's a perfect one. Yes. Well, is that really what you wanted to know? You probably actually wanted to know how many other offers they have in. So you could reframe that question and say, how many other offers do you have in? Same question, but now you're getting an answer that actually gives you some information that's helpful. There's a big difference between if there's one other offer in and 10 other offers in. Now, you can obviously ask that as a follow-up. You could say, do you have any other offers? They say yes. Oh, how many? Or you can just ask the question straight out the gate. So those open-ended questions just evoke more information. So, you know, and then like this one has, what is the bottom line price you would consider? That one is kind of a, well, this is the number, rather than saying something along the lines of, you know, what's important to your seller in this. So can you see the difference between open-ended and closed-ended, and how the open-ended might evoke more information? I got none of you on screen, so hopefully you're all still alive there. All right, so now let's look at some of the the ways this plays out, and then I'm actually going to have you guys work a couple scenarios together. But so what and why questions. So when we ask a what question, we're kind of looking at what's coming next. You know, what would happen if? And this is a question that you can have talking with your client. You know, okay, you're saying you want this. Well, what would happen if it went this way? And then why is this important to you? Now, one of the things about why questions, be careful with how you use why. Especially tonality with why becomes really important. Think about it. You know, why did you do that? Versus, oh, why did you do that? There's a big difference. So why can sometimes feel a little, not attacky, but a little bit like aggressive. So making sure that you use it in a way that's not, yes, exactly. Could feel like blaming. Sometimes there's a little bit of negativity associated with why questions. So two things I do, I either really watch my tone with it, or I'll rephrase it. Like, what is important? What about this is important to you? So again, it's a what question. But if you notice, there's something that sounds different, like what's important to you about that versus why is this important to you? Sometimes shifting it just a little can change the way it's received. All right, so somebody give me, let's do a quick role play. Who wants to role play? I'll be the agent and you can be the client. One. I swear I don't bite. Okay, Abby, I appreciate that. Over chat's kind of hard, but I do appreciate it. Oh, okay,
I'll do it with you.
All right, we're going to be easy. So, I mean, It just gives you kind of to see how it'll play out.
Mhm.
Okay. So, Caitlin, we're sitting down and we're going to write this offer. And I know that you really would like to be in the house by September 1st. And I know these sellers are saying that they can close quickly, but they really can't move by September 1st. So what would happen if we get this accepted, but they can't move until like September 30th?
I guess we could figure out like a hotel situation or something like that for a couple nights, or Airbnb or something like that.
Okay. Okay. That's great. So you see right there, she might have come back and said, I don't know what we're going to do with that. So it gives us some information there. We start to find out how important is that piece. Now, then the next thing would be, Caitlin, you told me you need to be in by September 1st. What about that's important to you? Sorry, I hate the why question, so I always shift it to a what. What about that's important to you?
Well, we want to have time to get settled before the kids, start school, or I don't even know when school starts. I'm totally making this up, but before the kids start school, so they're not moving and starting school in the same, week or so.
Okay. So now what I could also do with this is go back to okay, so I hear that. And what would happen if we found the perfect house and we couldn't get you in by September 1st? And then you'd go into like that Airbnb. So if you see these two questions allow you to kind of play with almost anything you're talking to them about in the negotiations. So that first starts with your client, and then even negotiating with the other side when they're saying, well, we can't do this. Okay, well, what would happen if we did this instead? So utilizing these two and having them in your back pocket, they always give you a direction to go in. And that's what we're always looking for, is how do we move the conversation forward versus stopping it? So, okay. So, I need full transparency, guys. Who's actually here and can talk, because this is an exercise that normally we would be doing the scenario. I partner you up. And so I don't want to partner people and have them not actually be able to to do the exercise. All right. So I got Manny, I got Cleo, Abby. I know that you're only on chat. Caitlin, are you somewhere where you can do the exercise as well?
I am. You just might hear my kids in the background.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so you guys should have this in your book. If you've got your book in front of you, it's page geez, I can't read I think it's 18.6. It says take action. And what wait, did I grab the wrong one? Hang on. I think I grabbed the wrong one. Because we've got two exercises. No, this is the right one. Okay. All right, so here's the scenario. You are representing a single buyer. Your client is renting her present property. Like any first-time buyer, she is looking to you to guide her through the process. The asking price for the home she really loves is $175,000. The house appears to have evidence of the roof leak. Is listed as is and is correctly priced. Your client would like to keep her payments as low as possible since she still has a number of student loans to pay off. She wants to write an offer for $155,000. There has been quite a bit of activity on the listing. So what questions would you ask? And you know what? Let's just do this as a group. I think that's probably easier than partnering up for this one, because we've got an odd number. So what questions could we ask?
The question to the buyer or the seller?
Manny, something happened to your mic. I can tell you're talking, but I can't hear you.
Oh.
You're muffled.
How's that?
No. Did you? That's weird because you were fine. All right. Well, Manny's working on that. What else do you guys have? All right. So what are some of the key things here? We know she's renting. We know she loves the house at 175. Yes, the leaky roof. We know it's as is, and we know that it's correctly priced. Now her focus is keeping her payments as low as possible because she's got those student loans. So she's going to write an offer for $20,000 below list price, and there's been a lot of activity. What do you think the odds are that she's going to get the house if she comes in at 155?
Not good.
Right.
0.
Right. So this is where, before we can even negotiate with the listing agent and the seller, we get to negotiate with our client. And sometimes that's harder than negotiating with the other side. So walking her through. So what are some of the questions we might ask? If we go back here, because this might help having it up in front of you. If we go back to what would and why is this important to you? What are some of the questions we might ask her? Yeah, what would happen if the offer gets rejected? So that might show up as, you know what, Sally, I know you really like this house. What would happen if we make the offer at 155 and it gets rejected? What else? What are some other what woulds or why is this important that might come up? Get to practice this here, guys, or you're going to be practicing it in real life. So what would you do? You've got a client who's not being super realistic here. I'll read you the scenario again. She's currently renting. She wants our help. She's a first-time buyer. The asking price is 175. We've at least got a roof leak thing. So, but it's an as-is sale and it's priced right. She wants low payments and she wants to make an offer for 155 when there's been a lot of activity.
Are there any places where we can get funds from to make the big down payment? Borrow money from relatives?
Yep, if that's a factor, yes. So these are ones. Now, some of these also, if you're doing a strong buyer consultation, you'll be able to have them done up front. So you'll know some of this and you can go back and remind her and say, remember when we talked about that if you found the house that was really the right house, that you might talk to your parents about whether or not they might be able to help a little. So you're able to pull back the information from past conversations. So again, you are negotiating from the second you sit down with your buyer or seller. Now, sometimes we think of negotiation as negative. It's not negative. We're negotiating to get them what they want. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. So when we're talking to this buyer who wants to come in 20,000 below list price, helping her see the light that that's probably not going to get her what she ultimately wants is our job. So we are negotiating with her to get her where her head needs to be to make the right offer. Yes. What about purchasing a home now is important to you? That's a good one, Abby. So if we know that and we can bring that back, what about this? What would happen if you didn't get this house? Well, I'm going to be super sad. Okay. what's important to you about this house? So again, the more we understand, the more we're able to negotiate and get them where they need to be. So this is one I kind of like. If this type of thing makes you feel a little uncomfortable, sit down and make a list. Just write out a bunch of questions. Like, what are questions that you think would make sense to ask a buyer or a seller? You can find a bunch of them out there, but I think when we sit with our own brains and make the list, it cements it more. So making a list, what are the questions I would ask? You've got this scenario in your book. So even if you're not doing it now, step back and go, what would I ask this person? This is a very common scenario. You have a house that is priced right, and you've got a buyer who's not being realistic about pricing. She probably has some flex on when she moves because she's renting, but that also might be a hard stop. So I would want to know that. You know, what would happen? Yeah, Caitlin. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm kind of getting hung up on, like, in this situation in particular, I feel like she shouldn't be purchasing this house. Like, as a first-time buyer, no, as is, leaky roof, like you have student loan debt that you want to be aware of. Like, this house isn't even the right option. So I'm kind of getting hung up on, like, I don't even want to ask her any more questions to try to persuade her to go higher. I want to tell her that this is not even where we should be.
Okay. And that might be, and you need clarity around that. That's a good one, Caitlin. So we know, we know that the house is probably going to need a roof. It looks like there's a leaky roof. So Susie Q buyer, what would happen if you get it and the roof leaks in 6 months? So again, that's you putting the things out that you're seeing as a possible stumbling block. So it's bringing her back into reality. And she may say, oh, remember I set aside some. Well, you've got those student loans though, how's that going to play? Do we need to find something that maybe doesn't have any repairs? Or do we need to come in a little bit higher and maybe ask if they'll fix the roof? If we're in at 175 and let's say she's approved to 200, but she'd rather be at 150. I know you love this house. What would happen if we tried to offer them a little bit above the list price and ask them to put a new roof on the house? Even though they've said as is, we can always ask. So that's a good one, Caitlin. Are we not talking them into it, but putting up the obstacles that they may not see? One of the things I'll do with people is kind of jokingly say, like I had one person who made an offer on a house that literally while we were at the house, we knew the train tracks were behind it, but while we were there, the train came by. And I mean, the train comes by, it was probably 15 feet from the back door. It felt like you were standing, like you could feel it. And so I said to them, how do you feel about that? And I told them, I'm always asking and I'm always looking at from the standpoint because I'm going to be selling this house for you when you move. And I want to make sure you're acknowledging that this might become an issue. So asking them questions that have them think about things they might not otherwise think about. And being an advocate for all the aspects, not, oh my goodness, they walked into this house and it's so cute and they're in love with it. And so they're throwing everything else out and forgetting about that. So that was a really good one, Caitlin. So yeah, start doing that. What are the questions? And then look at when you're with your clients, start kind of, even when you're not making offers, but start thinking, what are some of the things that this person is saying that when it comes time for us to make an offer, I need to remember and bring it back around to them as part of the negotiations. Any questions on that or any ahas from it? All right, let's talk about presenting. Okay, so we already kind of talked about this. First thing, call the other agent. Get as much information as you can out of them. And and this goes with talking with your client and talking with the other agent, pay attention to any of the nonverbal cues. Pay attention to pauses if you're where you can see them, facial expression, body language, change in tonality. All of those things are indicators on how people are feeling and what direction the negotiation is going in. Keep quiet once you present an offer. Now, this is more if you're presenting in person. Obviously, if you email an offer, it's going to be quiet because it's email. In your offer, though, you definitely, if you're emailing an offer, make sure that you send it over in a professional manner. Make sure it's going over and that you've shared as much as you can in that email to highlight your clients. So for me, I usually in my offer email will have a brief introduction, not a love letter, but a brief introduction, who my clients are, and I'll say something they love about the house, just because that gives a little bit about who my people are, not getting into anything that might be a fair housing violation, anything like that. But usually it's just, that Bob and Sue are buying this house. Sue's a nurse, Bob's a teacher, and they love it. They're super excited about the backyard and the garden that you have, because they love to garden and have fresh vegetables, and they totally see themselves doing that in your yard. That kind of thing. There's nothing that's a violation there, but it tied them to the house. It makes it so it's not just a generic offer. It gives a little bit of warmth to it. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to outline the highlights of the offer. The other thing, your attachment, these are little things, but they're things that matter from the offer standpoint. Do a complete package. Don't attach your documents where there's 15 documents attached to the offer. You can put them all into one PDF. Put them all into one PDF. Anything you can do that makes the listing agent's job easier helps in your negotiations. When we get an offer in and it's like, my goodness, they put like every single document for this offer as a separate attachment. Now I have to download all of those, and I've got 15 offers, and 5 of the agents gave me it in a format that's easy, and 10 of them gave it to me in a format that's making my life harder. Which one of those agents do you think I'm leaning towards already, just because one's making my life harder and one's making my life easier? So remember that. The keep quiet once you present an offer, really what that is saying is put the offer in and then don't tip your client's hand. Don't put an offer in and go, oh my God, I know it's on for 175 and my client came in at 155 and I know that's super low and I tried to talk her up. Put the offer in, let them respond, because you never know. They may have a lot of activity, but that seller may need that house gone yesterday, and you're the first offer in, and they take the offer at 155. So the more you talk, the more you tend to lose in negotiations. The more you listen, the more you tend to win, which takes us to number 4. Listen carefully to what is important to the other party. Listen to what's being said and what's not being said. What's the message behind the message? Because sometimes that's where you're able to get a little bit more creative. That's like we were talking about, if she needs to move now or if she needs to move later. Sometimes people say, yeah, I have to have that. And it's really, they're thinking there's only one way of meeting that need. But if you understand the need better, you may be able to put multiple options to meet that need out on the table. Stay calm and relaxed. That's just a good way to go about it, because the more stressed you get, the more you raise the tension in the entire negotiation. And the more stressed you get, the more you're not staying clear-headed, the more you're now getting emotional. Focus on the customer's needs. This is about what your client needs, not what you need. This is one of the reasons why, it gets hard when we're like, I need this commission. I don't know how I'm going to pay my mortgage if I don't get this commission. Now you've shifted. Now you're more focused on your needs than your client's needs. And there are times, kind of like you said, Caitlin, where talking a client out of a house is the right thing for them. I'll give you a good one. I had clients, this was many, many years ago, but they wanted to buy land they wanted to move somewhere where they could have their horses with them instead of boarding their horses. And their budget was pretty tight. And we had been looking for a really long time. And they made an offer on a house that definitely was a fixer. We knew it needed work. Had septic and well. When they came out and did the inspections, turns out the septic, there actually wasn't a septic. The sewer was just basically dumping into a pit in the ground. Pretty gross. And it was close enough to the well that there was a strong likelihood it was leaching into the well water. My clients wanted to move forward with this. And I was like, they did not have the money to deal with this. You're talking about not a situation that might be uncomfortable or a nuisance. You're talking about health and safety. I mean, their raw sewage is next to the water that you drink. I had to talk them out of the transaction. And it took some doing because they really wanted to stay in, and it was not the best thing for them. They didn't have the ability to do what needed to be done. And so is that fun? No. Is it the right thing to do? Yes. Our job is to always be focused on what they need. And sure, I would have liked that commission, but it made sense to talk them out of it. And then they ended up buying something down the line that was a much better fit for them. So, and then it's really give your offer the best chance. And giving your offer the best chance goes by doing all of these things. Like if you've done all these things, you've really done everything you can to put it out there in the best light. And then remember, even if you've got somebody on the other side that you're like, this person's being a real jerk, you stay happy and sweet, because we want to come from a space of we're called co-op agents. That's cooperating agents. That is our job, is to cooperate to get the deal done. Now, sometimes you get people who this is where they get their opportunity to be the big shot and they aren't as cooperative. Remembering that you get to choose how you show up. You don't get to control how they show up. And how you show up, if it's an agent who in general oftentimes has problems in their transaction because they're kind of a jerk, if you're able to keep an even head and make it through the transaction, that agent probably in the long run is going to remember you, because most likely they argue with a lot of agents and they didn't argue with you. So that means the next time you show up, it's like, hey, I had a smooth transaction with this person and I had, a negative transaction with that person. All things being equal, I'm going to recommend that my seller go with the one that we've gone the distance with before and kind of know how they work. Questions or ahas on presenting? Okay, let's talk about position then. Okay, so this is sort of when this is more when we really think about the actual negotiation. So positioning is kind of how do we move people forward and shift them into where there's an actual agreement. So this is where we're first looking for, here's where we're already working. Because it's very easy to kind of focus on, here's what's not working. So first reminding everyone, look, we're 90% of the way there. We've just got these couple things that we need to find common ground on. This is also where we're able to kind of go, okay, and here's where we just, both sides are pretty entrenched. And then we can look at how can we work around that. But first of all, looking where they're in agreement and reminding them of that. Oftentimes for the seller especially, let's say an offer comes in and everything in the offer is great except for price, and the seller is freaking out. Oh my God, I'm insulted. They came in so low. No, wait, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, look, I understand, and we'll talk about price. And remember, look, they did all of these other things that are really important to you. So now we just need to figure out a way to get the price to something that you can live with, because we've got all these other things that are exactly what you want. Reminding them of that. We have a tendency as human, it's called negativity bias. As humans, we tend to focus on the negative. And so it's very easy when everything's right to find the one thing that's wrong and get stuck on that. This takes that and flips it around and says, no, let's find the common ground. And then we go into that what and how questions. And again, this is you can use these on both sides with your client and with the listing or buyer's agent, depending which side you're on. You can go through, and again, these questions will pull out more what the priorities are for each side so that you can find that common ground without coming from a place of curiosity and asking these questions. It makes we're kind of operating in the dark. We're trying to negotiate and we don't know what we're really negotiating on, especially when it's beyond price. And most of the time we think price is the number one thing. Price is one little piece of this whole negotiation. So again, this is where creating those lists of questions so that you don't necessarily always have to think of them on the fly can be really helpful. And then remembering this is a process. Sometimes it's going to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. With buyers, sometimes the negotiating with your client means, they're not being realistic. I've done everything I can to get them to be realistic. This is where we say, well, they may just have to lose out on a couple of houses. That for you is part of the positioning process. It's part of the negotiation, because with each one, you're able to come back and negotiate with your client a little bit more in terms of getting them to understand more the realities of the market. And then ultimately, it's know when to walk away. If there is no common ground, if things are just not going to work, finding a way to, with integrity, with again, looking at it as a win-win, how do you walk away without damaging any of the relationships? And sometimes that's hard. And where that comes up oftentimes, that tends to happen less with the initial negotiations. That tends to be something that'll come up a little bit more when you're in it and you're negotiating on repairs. That tends to be more where people start to get angry. Because we've gotten this far and now we can't have a meeting of the minds. So that's one where finding a way to exit with grace and where everybody is left in the best position they can be left in. Any questions on position? Because we have another scenario to go through. All right. So since I'm trying to think of the best way to do this with you guys right now. Here's the activity, and while I'm reading it to you, I'll noodle in my head the best way for us to do this. Okay. So one of you would be the buyer's agent and one would be the listing agent. And what we're going to be doing here is the scenario is the property has 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and is listed at $350,000 in a well-established neighborhood. The house requires new carpeting throughout the first floor and a new garage door opener. 3 offers have been made, but all were below the asking price. So as the buyer's agent, your buyers are making an offer of $340,000 for the house. They have been pre-approved. The buyers would like to close in the shortest time possible since they are moving from out of state and need a home for their family. Since they are leaving their appliances in their current home, the buyers would also like all the appliances to be included. So that's the buyer side. Then on the listing agent side, your sellers have raised their family in this house you are selling and have many friends and family in the area. Since their children are now grown, they no longer need the amount of space their current home provides and have purchased a home in Florida. So they already have a house. They would like to give all the appliances to their daughter who has just gone through a divorce. They will not be moving until they have sold their current house. And although they would like to get to Florida as soon as possible, they are ready to stand their ground regarding the price. So using this, how would you go about negotiating this? And you know what, since again, we don't have even number, let's just talk it through. what are if you're the buyer agent in this, what are some of the strategies? What are some of the questions you're gonna ask either of your client or of the listing agent? All right, would it be easier for someone to role play this with me? Someone be the buyer's agent or the listing agent, and I'll take the opposite role. Guys are killing me. Come on. Yeah. Okay. Abby says, tell the buyer if they would ask the buyer if they'd rather lose the 10,000 or the appliances. So that might be one also as the listing agent. You might say to your sellers, I totally understand that you want to give those to your daughter. And, you know, if we can get these people to code a full price and they want the appliances, would you be willing to consider that? Maybe then you could give your daughter, you know, a little bit of cash to buy new appliances. Or, you know, these buyers really want the appliances. And since you want to take them and give them to your daughter, would you maybe be willing to meet them in the middle on that price? What else? Because this is close. You've got buyers that are coming in. They want a quick close, which would play well for the sellers. So these are the things when we're looking at this. The first thing you're going to look at is that common ground. So where are we at? That's already a win. We've got the buyers they're pre-approved. Yay. They want a short close, which is going to help the sellers because they've already bought a house. The appliance is a sticking point. So right now on the buyer side, the two things that are probably the sticking points are they're coming in 10,000 below the list price and they want the appliances. So then if we move to the seller side, you know, the sellers are ready to move. They've purchased a home in Florida. So there's another key there. They are now making 2 mortgage payments. So when they're talking about price, let's say it's been 2 months. Well, they've made 2 mortgage payments. If those mortgage payments start to add up, so reminding your seller of that can sometimes come into play. I understand these buyers are coming in 10,000 below the list price, and Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you've already spent $5,000 in mortgage payments. If we'd taken that first offer that came in that was only $5,000 below the list price, you would be, you know, in a better position now than having made 2 more mortgage payments. So again, looking at the different nuances and how can you work with them. So if you don't have your book in front of you, this is one I would go back to. I'm like, how do I get in front of the camera? And answer those questions for yourself. And I would also recommend, since you're not doing it here, grab somebody and role play these. Again, you're going to do it here or you're going to be doing it in real life. And I'd much rather have you do it negotiating with each other. Any other insights or questions or ahas on anything around negotiation and the 3 Ps? Do we know what the 3 Ps are? Do we remember? Yes. Preparation and knowledge are power. Asking good open-ended questions too, which does fall into preparation. We have a tendency, our brains tend to go to kind of black and white thinking in terms of questions. So, which leads us to yes and no questions. So if you get in the habit of building out questions beforehand, that gets your brain thinking in more of an open-ended question. So that's why I'm recommending doing some practicing and making lists of questions that you might ask in a situation. What else? What other ahas? Yes. Keep quiet when asking open-ended questions. Yeah, exactly, Abby. Ask a question and shut your mouth. So go back to, you probably all have heard it. We have one mouth, two ears. There's a reason. Listen double the amount of time you speak. Anything else?
Know your documents.
Yes. Here's the thing. That's one also that like anyone can do that. Some of these, sometimes we feel like, oh, well, I'm not as good at that. Learning your contract, everyone can do that. That is just practice, 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 practice. So what else? Anything else? All right, we'll keep cruising. All right, so now we're going to talk some negotiation tips, which some of this we've been doing throughout, but we'll cover some more now. Okay, I think I've beaten it to death. Be professional. It will show up over and over and over again in your business. When you are frustrated, emotional, anything like that, take a break. The worst thing you can do is have conversations when you're triggered. So stay professional. Keep your goal in mind. In most transactions, your goal is a signed agreement. Now, that might be the initial agreement. It might be when you're negotiating repairs. It's a signed repair addendum. It's a meeting of the minds. That's what you're going after. It's what your client's going after. It's what the other agent's going after and the other client is going after. So that's what everyone is going for. Sometimes that gets twisted in the middle though, and everybody starts coming at each other instead of working towards a mutual goal. Pay attention to your communication and the tone with anyone involved in the transaction. Again, this goes back to, here's where I see agents where this happens the most. We get on a call and we talk with the listing agent, and either the seller's being kind of obnoxious or the listing agent's being kind of obnoxious. And so we get off the phone, and because we want to bond with our clients, we call them up and go, oh my goodness, I just got off the phone with agent X and they're being such a jerk. They're telling me blah, 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 blah. Okay, so yes, now we've jumped into the let's complain and be negative together pool. We have done nothing to move the transaction forward versus saying, hey, Mr. Buyer, I just got off the phone with the listing agent and here's what they're saying. I don't need to get into how I feel about it. My feelings don't matter. The more I stay neutral, the more I win. The more I win, everyone in the transaction wins. The more I escalate and get anxious or jerky or angry or frustrated and show that, the second you start doing that, you lose. Again, go back to poker, and I'm a terrible poker player because I do not have a poker face. Poker face, that's what we're looking for in this, only across the board. Stay neutral. Neutral wins here. Continually refer to your client's motivation when you're talking with them. So this is reminding them, because sometimes we forget. We get too into winning. We forget what our real goal is. So bringing them back around. You know, I know you really would like them to take care of the leaky faucet. And in the grand scheme of things, we've got a quote that's going to be $300 to have it fixed. There's all these other things. Is this really, you know, the no line for you? That's when it makes me crazy, is when you get to a point in a transaction where a transaction falls apart over like $500 because no one will budge. It's ridiculous. So this is where you're able to just keep bringing back. Remember why we're doing this. Remember what's important to you, reminding them of that. Again, don't reveal too much. Listen more than talk, and keep your client's motivation close to your chest. That goes with either side. You want to know your client's motivation. You don't need the other side to know that. unless it's something that for some reason might be helpful. But usually understanding that it's something you want to know, it's something you definitely want to ask. It's not something you really want to share. So that shows up with, oh, you know, why are they selling? Yeah. If you get too into detail, you can damage your seller. You know, oh, they want to move to Florida to be with the grandkids. Okay. You know, now if I say they want to move to Florida to be with the grandkids and they, you know, bought a house a month ago, so they're really ready to go. Well, now you just told me something I can use, because I know these sellers are motivated to get gone. They might be more willing to negotiate versus just saying, hey, they're moving because they want to be closer to their grandkids. I answered your question, but I didn't tip my hand. And then 6, don't be attached to the outcome. You can want the outcome. If you get attached to it, then you've removed yourself from being able to be neutral. So you're not always going to get everything your clients need. You're going to act in their best interest and you're going to get them as much as you can. You're probably not always going to be able to get all they need. And if a client doesn't do what you want them to, try not to let that get to you. Don't be attached to it. And then when they don't do what you wanted them to do and they don't get what they want, you can in your head think, I told you so. Don't say that to them and don't let them know that's what you're thinking. Reminding them though, in that situation, you know, if that happens, you know, remember before when we were doing this, you know, we might want to handle it a little differently next time, kind of thing. And then if it's not a win, if that outcome, if you have to walk away because there isn't a win-win, remembering there will be another one and finding a different win for them, even if it's something that really goes sideways for them. Reminding them of why they walked away from it or why that didn't come together, and reminding them that there will be another house. One of the things I do know, and I say this to my clients all the time, but I know it to be true after 22 years in the business, the right house goes to the right person. So when they miss out on a house, there is something better for them, unless they're just repeatedly being absolutely ridiculous about their offers, which usually people aren't. They may initially make a few aggressive offers, and then they start to realize this is not going to get me where I want to go. So, what else do you think? Is there anything else that you think would be a best practice or a negotiation tip? Yes. First one to get angry loses. Yep. Keep your cool. It's true. And
what about things like negotiating timelines around holidays?
Tell me more.
Well, to get more time or to like get a better price, you know, and thinking like, well, banking days versus holiday days, maybe I can get my buyer a little bit more time on certain items.
Yes. So here's a good one on that. When you look at like inspections, so our contracts are written, the ORF forms are written with business days. So when we're looking at, when we say 10 business days, that's actually 2 weeks, because we've got weekends. We were going to have weekends in there. So thinking that there are times when you can negotiate and get your clients more time because of where the dates are falling. So when you're looking at dates, you can sit there and go, all right, if I can go in and say 7 business days, but because of where those business days fall, I'm actually getting, 10 days or 11 days for my client, but it looks stronger to the seller. So you can always play with the dates. And remembering, while you don't want to be too aggressive on your dates, there is the ability down the line, if you're aggressive and you just can't make the dates, to ask for an extension. It's not required that they give it to you. It is a possibility though. So knowing that, especially when you're competing. Now, one of the things when you're competing, it's very different than when there's nothing else on the table. So, but you always have the ability to play with the timeframes and to look at how best they're going to serve your clients. And it's one of the critical things. Sometimes people have a lot of flex on their timelines, and sometimes they have no flex on their timelines. So knowing that and understanding on both sides, who has flex, who doesn't have flex. Sometimes you can close something quickly and do a rent back because the people need the money to move. Sometimes they need a longer close. So those are questions to ask and be clear on with both parties so that, again, you can try and find that middle ground that works for everyone. Did that answer that, Cleo?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Good. What else? Anything else in terms of best practices? So give me a little bit now, because we actually, this is shocking because I always go overtime, and we're actually wrapping up a little, we're short today, which is a miracle. But give me a little bit. What did you learn? Give me, we've walked through what negotiation is. We've talked about how it relates to the transaction. We've talked about the 3 Ps, some of the best practices. Tell me some of your ahas, and tell me how you're going to implement this. Yes, there's a good book called Never Split the Difference that touches on a lot of the stuff we've learned about today. Yes. Thanks, Abby.
I think it's a good reminder to not be afraid to call the other agent about things. I sometimes get hesitant about calling because I know everyone's super busy. I don't want to be like another voice in their ear, another thing that they have to deal with. But most of the time in this situation with offers and stuff, it's going to be more beneficial to pick up the phone and have a quick conversation with them than to assume or just not ask or talk about it.
Definitely. And here's the thing. Usually what I will do is I will do a phone call and an email. Unless sometimes they're very specific about how they want you to reach out. So usually what I'll do is I will make the call, and hopefully I get them and I get to talk to them. If not, I will leave, a message. And if it's just a couple questions I have, I'll ask them so that if they call back, they can, it's not always easy to directly talk to them, but at least they get my questions answered. And then I usually will say, I'm going to follow up with an email. And then I ask very detailed questions, and I make them very in your email. If you're asking specific questions, break them up so it is very clear, like a line in between each one. Here's why. 1, it makes it easier for them to go through and answer. 2, it's very obvious if they skip a question. So if they skip a question, there may be a reason why they didn't answer it. So I'm going to circle back on that and say, hey, you know what? Thanks so much, Caitlin, for answering all those questions. I noticed you didn't answer blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me what's going on with that? So I'm able to circle back. And I will also say, unfortunately, there are agents who are just horrible about responding to any of the questions. Don't be that agent. Respond. Part of your job as a listing agent is to respond to questions and answer people. Now, sometimes that does not mean you can answer every phone call. You can sometimes put together, like if you've got 15 offers coming in and there's a bunch of questions, oftentimes what becomes easier to do is to go, here's the 15 questions all these people are asking. I'm going to send a blanket email out to everyone. That just kind of answers all those questions, because I don't have the ability to have all those conversations before the time offers are due. What else? So these ahas kind of give you like, what is changed? What about your thinking has changed? And what do you feel differently about? And what actions? So that's, what actions are you guys going to take walking away from this today? What are you going to do different?
Has something to do with the preparation. So I was on vacation for like 2 months, and then when I came back, my son is my client. So we went to a house, a property, and then he liked the house, and I only had like an hour to actually make an offer, present the offer.
Yeah.
So I was really scrambling. That's why I called, I tried to get in touch with you, coach, because I was really, really rusty. And I was putting away especially the documents. I was thinking before that, well, when I get there to that point, then I will learn it. But 1 hour wasn't really enough. So I was really scrambling. And again, going back to that thing, preparation, it means a lot. It's the key. Just like what was mentioned earlier, it's the key to making a smooth process. So I'm taking care of that right now. I'm actually trying to make sure that I am going to be really good at, when it comes to documents, so
Okay.
that when that thing happens again, I'm going to be really prepared.
Yes, and that's it. Preparation makes such a difference. The other thing with that is, again, reminding clients, hey, we need to get into houses quickly, because if it's an hour before offers are due, it's almost impossible. That's not just you, Manny. I would have been in the same boat. Now, with that, the other thing, and this is a negotiation, if an agent has said 5 o'clock and you're seeing the house at 3:30 and you know you're going to write, calling them immediately and saying, I just showed the house. I know your deadline is 5 o'clock. Can I have till 7? Sometimes they can't because they're presenting that night. A lot of times they're not. So it buys you some time. So there's another negotiation tactic. It is better to have the conversation. And if they say, no, my client's actually coming in at 5:30 and we're looking at offers, then you're kind of out of luck. Or you can say, look, here's what my client's gonna write up. Is that going to be anywhere in the ballpark? If so, can we at least like put this in as like an email, and I'll get the contract behind it, so you've got it. Like, again, it's getting a little creative there on how can I keep it together long enough for me to be able to write it up. And as new agents, give yourself as much of a buffer as you can. Anything, whatever time frame if you think it's going to take an hour, give yourself 2 hours. That again will help to keep your emotions a little calmer. And yes, Abby, that's great. Negotiation isn't something negative and something to be scared about. It's a conversation. It really is. It's different levels of conversation, but it's kind of a conversation or a dance. And so if you just think about, we're playing off of each other and remembering that everybody is going after the same goal. Anyone in a real estate transaction that's involved in it has the goal of a closed sale. Now, I will throw one little wrench in the works. Sometimes when you're doing this is when you find out that people are saying that's their goal, but somewhere inside of them, the goal is not to buy or sell. There's enough of a fear. So, and that oftentimes you'll see, it might be a couple where one person is definite and the other person is doing everything they can to kind of sabotage the negotiations. If you see that happening, that's when you pull it back around and you sit down and you have a negotiation with your client. I'm noticing that this is happening. Can you tell me more about this? What's going on there? And there's nothing wrong with ultimately saying, I'm curious. Is this something you want to do right now? Now, that is a closed-ended question, but it also makes them stop and go, oh, no, I don't. Okay, then why are we doing this? Or yes. If they say yes, then it's like, okay, so if this is something we know you want to do right now, here's the things that are showing up and getting in the way, and walking them through that. So the negotiation is a conversation. That's really what it is. What else? Any other ahas or anything you're going to do differently? All right. Any last questions then about anything?
I do have another question for you. Totally unrelated.
That works.
Perfect. As you know, I'm a newer agent with limited time due to my kids. And I kind of went into this thinking like my maiden lead gen would be doing open houses on the weekends because that's when my husband's home. And then open houses were super slow, the handful of ones that I did. Not much has come from them. So I was kind of getting discouraged and looking at other options of mailers or phone calls or something like that. So and there's just, I guess, so many options out there, and then so many different companies, that are calling you, trying to get you to go with them, like lead gen companies. And so my question is, like, if you had to go back to the start of your career and could really only focus on one or two lead gen avenues, like what would you recommend, or what would you do?
I would do my Sphere and get them totally integrated on 36 Touch, so they're hearing from me regularly. I would, if you're not familiar with it, the DTD2, so that everyone in your Sphere is getting a phone call from you at least once a quarter, among other things. So I would do that. And you're doing what I would do, open houses. And here's the thing.
Okay.
Time of year makes a big difference on open houses. This time of year, everyone talks about summer being amazing, and summer is amazing in real estate. And there's also chunks of time during the summer that are a little wonky. This is one of those times. So right now, it just, because everyone's kind of in flux. They've just gotten out of school. Now we're coming into 4th of July. I mean, like, I was at the airport last night, and it was a zoo on a Monday night at like 9 o'clock because everyone's traveling. Okay. So if you can, don't get discouraged on the open houses. They are an incredible tool. And remembering that each person you meet there goes into your database and gets followed up on. One of the experienced agents I coach just closed an open house lead from 3 years ago. So you're filling your pipeline for the long haul, and open houses tend to be the fastest way to find that buyer that is a right now buyer. I just closed a transaction off of that. Actually, it got referred to me because they came through an open house on someone's listing who the seller was not comfortable with them representing. So they referred them to me. But that was came through the open house, bought the house. So you never know what's going to happen with that. So try and not lose the faith. You're doing the strategies I would do. They're the most cost effective, and they're the most people intense. But your Sphere is the number one.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Welcome. What else? Any other questions about anything?
So, Coach, my question is, this might have been touched in the other units, but I have a pressing need to find out what the answer is now. So it's about funding for like with making negotiations, presenting the offer. So when they say proof of funds, what do they want? Is it just from the bank, like a bank statement?
Yeah. So when you're doing proof of funds, you can do it from the standpoint of some people get a little weird sometimes about proof of funds because they don't want to share their information. So some banks will write a letter, like the banker will write a letter. Sometimes, usually what people do is they will do a statement from a retirement account, bank account, money market account, whatever account it's in. You black out the account numbers on it so that the account numbers don't, and you send that. The only time sometimes people don't want to do that route is because if you're making an offer on a house and it's $500,000 and you've got $1 million sitting in that account, sometimes you don't want the seller to know that you have $1 million sitting in that account. That's when you typically would go back and ask the bank or somebody there to write a letter stating that you have liquid funds in X amount.
Okay.
If it's down payment funds that they want proof of funds for, usually people are okay if the lender says, I've verified the funds are available to close.
Okay. All right. And then the other question after that is, if I have a client who lives here in the United States as a permanent resident or citizen, but they sold a house, let's say in Brazil, and they have the dollar funds in Brazil bank still. Is that going to be a deterrent if they ask for like a bank statement from that country that they have this so much money to make a payment? Or
it sometimes can be. It kind of depends. I'll tell you, if it was me and I got something from that was a foreign account, I would be asking more questions as the listing agent, just to make sure. Mainly because sometimes, and it depends on the country, but it's not always. Some countries, it's harder to move your money out of that country. And so it's just one of those where I want to make sure, as the listing agent protecting my seller, that those funds really are something that they're going to be able to utilize and access. So I will sometimes ask, especially if I get the vibe that the agent on the other side might be newer, because they might not know that.
Yeah.
Some of this you just find out as you go along and have bad things happen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? Any other questions? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you guys for coming today. And, I know I'm Manny's coach. I'm not the rest of your coach, but I'm always here if you've got questions. So always feel free to reach out, and have a great rest of your day. It's beautiful. Maybe you get to go play for a bit.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Coach.
rest of your day. Thank you.